Lesson number 103 is more on rational equations. And of course, a rational equation is just an equation that has ratios in it, and a ratio is just a fraction. So in this one we have to solve. What that means is find the value for y that makes the left side of the equation equal to the right side of the equation. And the way we do that is by finding our common denominator and then multiplying each term by our common denominator. So when we look at 2, 4, and 6, our least common denominator must be 12. So we're going to take each term and we're going to multiply it by 12. So we've got y over 2, and we're going to multiply it by 12, plus 1/4, which we're going to multiply by 12, is equal to y over 6, which we're going to multiply by 12. When we go through that, we're going to get 12 times y, 12y divided by 2, plus 12 times 1 is 12, divided by 4, is equal to 12y over 6. Now, when we have that, we can go ahead and simplify, because 12 divided by 2 is 6. So we're going to get 6y plus 12 divided by 4 is 3. 6y plus 3 is going to be equal to 12 divided by 6 is 2, so we get 2y. We have 6y plus 3 is equal to 2y. Now, if we want to go ahead and solve this, let's go ahead and we will move our 6y to the other side. So we're going to get, when we work with this, we'll work over here. We're going to get 3 is equal to, and we're subtracting 6y on both sides, so 2y minus 6y, if we subtract 6y, and I'm going to show that down here. Subtract 6y, subtract 6y, 3 is going to be equal to negative 4y. Then in order to solve for y, we're going to divide by negative 4. Divide by negative 4 on both sides, and we've got our final answer. We can see that y is going to be equal to negative 3/4, and we've got our final answer. So in order to make this equation true, in order to solve it, we've got an answer of y equals negative 3/4. So when we substitute that value in here, it makes our whole equation true. Let's look at some more examples. Let's solve. We've got a rational equation again, but this one is different. This one is different because it has a binomial n plus 2 in the denominator. Now remember, denominators can never be equal to 0. So the first thing we have to do in this is say what n cannot be equal to, because there's one value that can make this whole equation unsolvable or untrue if the denominator is 0. And that would be if n is equal to negative 2, because negative 2 plus 2 equals 0. So we can say n is equal to negative 2. We can say n cannot be equal to negative 2 as the first part of our answer. So our answer, n cannot be equal to negative 2, that needs to be stated in our answer, and that needs to be stated first, because if we don't have that, then we can't be sure that whatever we find is true. So n is not equal to negative 2. When we have that, then we can go ahead and solve. Well, our first step in solving now will be to multiply by the common denominator, or the least common denominator. And that would be multiplying our left-hand term by 5 and our right-hand term by n plus 2. Let's look at that, what that would look like. We're going to get n over n plus 2. We're going to take this whole term, and we're going to multiply it by our least common denominator, which would be n plus 2 times 5. This is all going to be, from this we're going to subtract, and we're going to get 3/5. And 3/5, we're going to multiply that by our least common denominator of n plus 2 times 5. And the whole thing is equal to 0. And we've got to do the same thing with our 0. We've got to take that, we've got to multiply it by our least common denominator of n plus 2 times 5. Now, we'll go ahead and simplify. Let's cross out what we can. n plus 2, when it's divided, n plus 2 divided by n plus 2, that cancels. The 5's cancel. And over here, well, everything's still equal to 0, because anything times 0 is 0. So when we rewrite, we're going to get 5 times n, 5n, minus, we have n plus 2 times 3, n plus 2 in parentheses times 3 is equal to 0. Now we have to solve for n. Let's use our distributive property. So we're going to get 3n plus 3 times 2, that's 6. We have 5n minus 3n plus 6 equals 0. 5n minus 3n is 2n, so we get 2n plus 6 equals 0. Let's move 6 to the other side of our equation, and we get 2n equals negative 6. So in this one, well, we're going to divide both sides by 2, and if we take half of negative 6, n must be equal to negative 3. So we've got our answer. N cannot be equal to negative 2, and n is equal to negative 3. Those would be the two parts of our answer. For this one, we need to say what n cannot be, and we need to see what n must be. We've got those two steps in order to solve this type of equation. That's why this whole lesson is about more on rational equations. Let's look at one more. Here we have another one. And remember first, when we have a binomial, and this one is interesting because we also have an x in our denominator. So we need to say what x cannot be equal to. X cannot be equal to several things. Well, x cannot be equal to positive 2, because 2 minus 2 is 0, and that would make the whole equation untrue, or unsolvable. But if this x is 0, that would make the whole equation untrue as well. So x cannot be equal to 2, and x cannot be equal to 0. We can't have either of those. So let's box that as the first part of our answer. Now, we can say what x is going to be equal to. That's what we have to find. In order to do that, let's multiply everything by our least common denominator. So we've got 4 over x. And our least common denominator is going to be x times x minus 2. Minus, and then we've got that 7 over the x minus 2 as our second term. And we're going to multiply it by our common denominator of x times x minus 2. Now the whole thing is going to be equal to 0 because we saw in the last problem when anything is multiplied by 0, it still equals 0. So here, the x minus 2 and the x minus 2 cancel. And on the left-hand term, the two x's, x divided by x, cancels. And now we can go ahead and simplify. We've got x minus 2 times 4. And from that, we're going to subtract x times 7. And the whole thing must equal 0. So when we simplify, we're going to get 4x minus 4 times 2 is 8 when we use that distributive property, minus, and then we have 7x. Let's switch the order of that so we can see how many x's we have. That will all be equal to 0. Now 4x minus 7x equals negative 3x. And let's move the negative 8 to the other side in one step. So negative 3x is equal to positive 8. We'll divide both sides by negative 3. And we've got our final answer. X must be equal to negative 8/3. And we're all done. That's what we're looking for. That's the value of x that makes this whole equation true. So x is equal to negative 8/3. Remember to state what x cannot be equal to, then find what x is equal to for these problems where we have a variable in our denominator. Our lesson practice will be on page 437. Make sure you've got your notes complete, and I'll see you during our next class.